I have been making models since I was a very, very young lad, and even today we are a model making family. Now, as you've seen, I love building scratch model ships, particularly ships, passenger ships and freighters post Second World War and built in the United Kingdom. And I love scratch building, but I also love collecting kits. I do make the occasional kit, but most of my work is scratch building. My brother, on the other hand, doesn't do scratch building, and he does kit building. Now, on the face of it, kit building appears far easier than scratch building. In some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. Here is our story. I'm Andrew St Pierre White. Join me as I share my passion for building four-wheel drive trucks and travelling to the remotest parts of the world. I have been asked to, I don't know, not that many times, but enough times for me to now want to make a video about my modelling. We all started with kits like this. Airfix was our kit model of choice, and that was what we would wait for our birthday and Christmas money to buy. This one here is actually the Lockheed Hudson. Now you can see by the shape of the Hudson that it's a very fat-bodied, round-bodied little aircraft. Now I loved this aeroplane because I was quite round and fat-bodied as a kid. I was quite chubby. We would play planes, dive and shoot each other down, and it was a major part of our growing up. Here's another example. Here is the Helldiver, and here's actually a picture from 1970 of me holding it. You can see me holding it there. And again, that's what they start out as. Very familiar to many of you. Our love of aeroplanes no doubt started from the days spent at the Biggin Hill Air Show as long ago as 1965. We would go to the air show and then go and buy kits of the planes that we had seen. Here is one of the RAF Lockheed Hercules. And here on Christmas morning is the model. Likewise, the Sea King helicopter and the model. Plastic kit model making is today no longer considered a kid's plaything. Adults do this more than young people. As a consequence, the quality of the kits today bears little resemblance to that 40 years ago. I do occasionally build model kit aircraft like these two, Sea Fury and Ferry Swordfish, but my skills are on a different level altogether when I look at my brother Simon's work.
Morning.
Travelling a little slower, but well, I think a lot of the replicas.
Say something then.
A lot of the replicas have slightly
We've got lots of cars here.
but the GT40s are really.
We're waiting for the planes.
Yeah, we are really. We're waiting for the planes.
We're waiting for the planes.
Yeah, we're waiting for the planes. Yeah, we're going to do this a lot. Like I build a lot of my ships that have a significance to me, he builds a lot of his aircraft that have a significance to him and the family.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime event.
In from the left.
Some of his aircraft are replicas of aircraft actually flown by our close relatives during the Second World War.
Battle of Britain's only Victoria Cross was won by a Hurricane pilot.
My other brother, Martin, is also a model builder. But even today, the family joke persists that if he ever made a model, it either would remain unpainted, or if he really applied himself, would be painted one colour, silver.
The Canberra was sold to the Americans, and they called it the Martin B-57. And when you see it, you'll understand why, because only one colour.
Well, lining up now is...
And even today, he gets very excited when he finds pots of silver paint. And no story about my family's model building would be complete without a mention of my father's obsession with the Hamden bomber. With kit-built plastic models, most of the build time is taken up with finishing, the weathering and the realism. With scratch-built ships, it's mostly the construction. So this is my very latest creation. Scratch-built RMS Arundel Castle. The Arundel was launched in 1919, built at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland, the same shipyard that built Titanic. The Arundel Castle was the only four-stack liner built not primarily for the transatlantic service. It joined a fleet of mail ships carrying passengers and mail from England to South Africa. My love of ships is, without question, rooted in a trip that I took when I was just 6 years old. My father, who was a foreign correspondent, was assigned to Rhodesia, and the family moved there in November 1966. We sailed on the Rhodesia Castle, which was later to become a model that I made. It stirred not only a love for me of ships and the sea, but of the Union Castle liners, and I have built several Union Castle liners. The first one I built was the Windsor Castle.
I am now lying on the bottom bunk of cabin E204 on board the Windsor Castle. We have just been through the worst part of our voyage, the Bay of Biscay. The weather was very poor, the winds swept the decks, and the rocky seas made the Windsor Castle bob about a bit. I wasn't really seasick, just occasionally a little bit off colour. Martin was the worst affected, although not very bad. But now the waves are getting lower and lower, and the boat is not rocking about quite as much as it was a few hours ago.
We returned to the UK in 1972, only to leave again 2.5 years later, but this time on the Union Castle liner Windsor Castle. So it was the Windsor that became my first scratch-built liner, but it was not my first model boat. That probably began with this one, a working yacht. Following that, I built a number of working boats, including a tugboat that I would take out onto the lake, put my girlfriend in a rowing boat with me, and have the tug tow us around. At the time, I was big into black and white photography. This is a working model of the coastal freighter Jan M, taking a long voyage on our swimming pool. Here are two photographs, one in 1973, you can see me sitting in bed there and some models on the shelves behind me, and again in about 1977, and there you can see lots of models on my shelves. So I'm going to go through with you now the process by which I make one of these models. The biggest single challenge starts on day one, and that is finding good plans. Now what I've done in the past with the ships that I've sailed on is actually get the deck plans that you're given for free when you get on board. I collect these. I've got quite a nice collection of them, not only ships that I've sailed on, but other ships as well. So what I do is actually draw my plans from these ship plans, and they work very, very well. And I use lots of photographs as well. And of course, with the birth of the internet, since I started building my first ships, photographs are now reasonably abundant. There's one story about plans that I need to actually tell you, and it's these ones here. Now, I had built the Edinburgh Castle, the Windsor Castle, the Caledonian Monarch, and I was looking for another project, and I went into a little store in Johannesburg, it no longer exists, and I said, I'm looking for plans. So, you know, there were a few catalogues of plans, and not very many, certainly not of any ships that I wanted to build, mostly warships, and I don't particularly like building warships. And I said, do you have any plans? And he said, it's funny you should say that. I actually threw some out the other day. I wonder if they've actually been taken away. Let me go and look. And this is what he came back with. The plans of the Transvaal Castle. Isn't that a beauty? And these were the perfect plans for a project. They were an absolute godsend. So I built the Transvaal Castle. Then after that I thought, okay, let's give the Union Castle ships a bit of a break, and I looked for plans for the Canberra. Now the P&O liner Canberra will be very well known to many Australians in that, like the Union Castle ships used to carry regular passengers from the United Kingdom to South Africa, the Canberra used to carry, over the same period of time, passengers from the United Kingdom to the New World in Australia. Very, very famous ship, and probably one of my most difficult models to date, and I think actually one of my best. She really is a very, very beautiful ship. So once I've got plans, the next thing to do is buy the building material. And here they are. The main material is this. It is plywood. Very, very thin plywood. This is 1/32 of an inch thick. And I use it for superstructure, the hull, sides of the hull, but the ends of the hull are made from balsa wood. So the only balsa wood I use, the funnel and the bow and the stern. Otherwise no balsa. Apart from the sea base that I will show you later on, I also use bits of balsa to help me with that. Styrene card, quite important. I don't use a lot of it. Basically the superstructure and everything is all wood. I find wood easier to work with. It's just nicer to work with than styrene card, but sometimes styrene card is nice to work with. And a little bit of slightly heavier ply, which I might use on parts of the deck. If I needed a little bit of heavier material on the deck, I'd use that. Now, on my ships, I've always worked hard to make the deck quite realistic. And in the past, what I've done is I have taken two very, very fine strips of spruce, such as this. This is actually thicker than I would have used for decks. This is another building blocks, spruce and beech strips. Quite a lot of that. And a ship would easily consume that much. Actually, probably double that much in total. So quite a bit of that. But I would stick thin bits of spruce together with a glue, a white wood glue that I had coloured brown, and then I would sand it and I would make a deck. I did that until the invention of this stuff. This is self-adhesive, and it is a 1 in 200 scale decking. Now I now use this. Yes, it's a lot easier, but it's also a lot more realistic than the deck I would have to make by hand. I would start by doing the walls of the hull. This is the Canberra. These are some of the stages of my building of the Canberra. Typically a ship like this would take 2.5 to 3 years to complete. Without question, the most common comment that I will receive when people see my models, because they are displayed around our house and have been for decades, is, "Oh, you must have such wonderful patience." No, I'm not a particularly patient person at all. The thing is that building a model like this isn't, you work hard and you build the model and then suddenly it's finished one day and you go, wow, that's the reward. That's not how it works at all. The actual process itself, there are little bits of reward all the way along the line from the very beginning to the very, very end. And even with my models being displayed, I get enjoyment out of them like I do a nice piece of furniture. This is the part, though, that people, I think, believe takes the greatest patience. I guess it does in a certain way because it's quite laborious and the process is quite slow. But if you look here, this, for example, is an N-scale railway bench. Now, that bench is just one of the purchased items that I will use in the detailing of my ships. Some of the commercially available ship fittings that I could purchase, I needed to adapt to get the scale right. And here's a typical example. This is a little Billings lifeboat. But for Canberra, it was too short. So what I did is I took two of them, cut it in half, joined it together like that, and then made a mould of it. And there's the mould. So now I use an epoxy plastic, which I pour in there, and I can make my own lifeboats. I have a similar mould for the ship's boats that I put into the Arundel Castle. There are also occasions where I have used my 3D printer. Now, my 3D printer doesn't print in high enough resolution to do a lot of the things that I would like it to do, but it did manage to do the stacks for the Arundel. But perhaps the most interesting is the way I have the railings created. Now, for decades, I purchased a sheet of railing which is branch etched from a website. They'd send it to me. I did that until 2015 when I was living in England at the time, and I came across a company that would actually make me a brass etch exactly to my specifications. So I got a photograph of a Union Castle line ship and then drew a drawing of the railings and had them make them for me in 1:200 scale. And there they are, and I had a whole lot made, and that is a vast improvement on my old models. Working with brass etch can be very, very fiddly, but the rewards are wonderful. Other bits and pieces, for example, pins, typically used in railways, working with railways, stanchions and things like that. I can purchase some of them. Anchor, chains, and things like that, all kinds of things. And I have collected a lot of them over the years. You're probably wondering if I have ever built any scratch-built cars. The answer is yes, just one. It was, guess what? A Range Rover. Now, I actually started building this in my last year at school, which is 1977. The body was made of balsa. The plans were actually drawn by my brother, same brother that makes all those beautiful aeroplane models. I built it with four-wheel drive. It had a Meccano transmission, electric motor. It had four-wheel drive. It was wonderful. I kept it for years and years and photographed it a lot. It no longer exists. I do have a small collection of die-cast model cars and a lot of, yes, you guessed it. I think officially now I can say that it is an obsession. It is. I am now in the very last stages of building my RMS Arundel Castle. the last bit of work really is the detail, and I use N-scale railway components for some of the barrels. The scale isn't quite right, they're a little bit too big, but they're close enough. And I also will put people on the deck, again N-scale railway people. I can't find 200 scale people anywhere, they're just not made, and would be too difficult for me to actually make them myself. The last stage, of course, is the sea. Now, you can see quite clearly that there are a lot of cracks in it, and that's why I do it 1/2 at a time. So you can see here that I have done just half of it, and there are some cracks showing, but that's not a problem at all because I fill it with clay once they're both dry. There is a bit of shrinkage, that's why I do the 1/2. So if there's a little bit of shrinkage, I can then just move the ship a little bit and then do the other half. And this is the product I use. It's called DUS. I've tried many different types. This is the only one that doesn't crack badly. This is not bad. This is pretty average for a flat, smooth surface, a thin layer that I have built. Then I will spray paint the blue sea, the wake around the ship, and I will make a glass case. The very last bits, once everything is done and the case is ready to be dropped on, is I will run lines. You can just see one of them there. I will run lines and do the final rigging. And the reason why I do that, the very last thing, is because now if I am now working on the boat, and if there was rigging between here, I would pull it off. It's so thin that you can barely see it. I hope you have enjoyed my little story about my model building. It's something that I absolutely love to do, and instead of watching mindless television, I will come into my little den and I will build a model. Thank you for watching.